do this? Right, so I'm going to show you a house that I worked on with my colleague Tom Hopes, who is sitting here with me, just the other side of the desk. And I want to show you this because we finished it, and the reason I did it is because any girls out there listening in, it's very hard to get jobs as an architect as a woman. People don't take you seriously. And I qualified obviously as an architect. I built a little bit during my last sort of 20 years, and I'd had trouble getting construction jobs. And so I decided to buy property, to buy sites in London, to borrow money, buy sites and build them out and get recognition for building in that way. So a bit of a convoluted way, but I found it was really difficult to be taken seriously. So I bought this set of 3 garages you can see on my screen now. They're in Earl's Court, which is in Kensington. They were completely run down and built in the 50s. So we knocked them down, spent probably 2 years getting planning consent. By the way, getting planning permission in Kensington and Chelsea costs a fortune, and we ended up spending nearly as much as the land getting planning consent on professional fees and so on. So I'm going to zoom right back to the finished house. So that's what was built. And I might just zoom in for you so you can see a bit better. So white stucco houses, Victorian houses, right and left. New house nestles under the tree. We could only get planning consent to go up to that height. We failed to go higher. We lost at appeal. So we did this house, which is, the idea is that it is like a glass house or greenhouse on the garden of the big Victorian villa you can see on the right. Traditionally, it was part of the garden of that house, so it kind of made sense. So that was the rationale, and to continue the garden wall all along the street line, and then have this little glass house poking its nose up over the top. And that's just a closer view, and this is the entrance, and this is going into the house. This is in a small space between the pavement and the front wall. That's basically the interior front glazed wall of the house. And this is inside the house, and this is a door, this curved piece. The reason it's curved, you will be able to see from the plan. The reason it's curved is that if you see going in the front door there, you go into a lobby. And that lobby takes you down to the basement bedrooms. That's a fire lobby, so it's a requirement. But to come from that lobby into the house, I didn't want to come straight forward, looking at the back wall, not interesting. Straight sideways, looking at the kitchen, not interesting. I wanted to come in on the diagonal, and I could see no way of coming in on the diagonal other than coming through a curve. And that is a large door that curves open and takes you into that space with a nice view. And this is the curved door opening, and that is the view, and that is the view to the kitchen. And I'm also going to show you a working drawing. So this is a working drawing of that, it's a shop drawing of that curved door. So fast forward through to when we've got contractors on site, we've got planning, we've got contractors on site. Their joiners do what's called a shop drawing or a manufacture drawing. So here it's done by Darlow Limited Bespoke Joinery Specialists. Right, they take our drawing. We will have done a very detailed drawing of this. They then draw it up, add their sort of calculations for hinge turns and so on. They then send it to us, and we red pen it. So you can see Tom has written here, face of steel should follow curve of door. There's obviously a little steel piece here that it fits against. That should not be straight. It should follow the curve so that everything goes in a. And again, this is a steel door jamb, and that should follow the curve of the door so everything's fluid. So I wanted to show you that so you could see what it means. And you're not meant to be looking at that. So here you can see looking back at the hallway, in the distance there you can see the door that leads onto the street, and I'm going to take you down to the basement, which is now a bedroom, looking out onto that internal courtyard, which I want to show you on the plan. That's the courtyard. By the way, Will, can you see my mouse moving around when I point to things?
Yes, we can. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So that's a courtyard on the ground floor, which goes down to the basement. There, you see, that's on the basement floor. That was the bedroom we just looked at, that direction, which was that view. So that's the basement courtyard, and that's the view out. You can see we've got sunlight coming in there. Now, in order to make sure we got some daylight into the basement, we did a 3D model. We put what are those? What's the sun called, Tom?
A heliodon.
A heliodon. Tom put the heliodon on the 3D model, and then you can then work out where the sun is going to fall any month of the year, any day in any month, any time in that day. So we can check 10 a.m., 9 a.m., December, March, June, September, and this was probably around May, and this is probably about 11 a.m. So we knew we could get light into that courtyard. In order to get light into the courtyard, we had to have a kitchen here with a glass roof, because the sun is coming there, going through the glass above that kitchen, through the glass there, and landing and reflecting on this wall here. And that's what you see there. Oops, that reflection. So when you're building a building, when you're designing a building, it's really good to work out where the sun is going to fall. You kids are all going to be good and very proficient on the computer, and I'm sure you can all build 3D models. We use a program called Vectorworks, which is one of the standard software drawing packages. And in Vectorworks, if you're good at these kinds of things, it's pretty straightforward to build up your 3D model and put your heliodon and see where the light's going to be. Because actually, when we were designing this house, we had the whole house flipped. And at one point, Tom said, "Should we just see what it looks like flipped?" We flipped the whole house and realized the way the sun path worked, that we were going to actually have the courtyard on this side. So we then have a bathroom. That bathroom has a window in it. Now, this is a completely interior shower room. It should be pitch black. What we realized is that we could get light from the entrance hall coming through the glass over the entrance hall, flowing down the stairs, and here you can see actual daylight shining on the back of that glass, which is obviously not clear glass because you're in the shower. It's whitened glass or whatever. If we jump back to that plan again, you can see the light in that's the shower, that's the little window. The light's coming down there, and it's coming in over the top of that staircase there and dropping in there to see the actual light. So I would say when you're doing when you're really trying to work out how you're going to lay out a building, work out where the sun is, particularly if you're working on tight sites like this in a city, because you're very hemmed in and you need to get every bit of daylight you can. And I'm going to just take you back to the front of the house, because here you can see we've got this glass coming up and going over, and here that's the kitchen is under there, the glass comes up and goes over. So you might wonder how all that glass comes in, and I'm just going to show you if this will work. A little movie in the middle of construction where they're bringing the glass in from the street, craned it off the glass lorry, and then lowering it down into that courtyard there. In fact, you can just see this front glass is in. That bit is that bit. And so when you're designing a building, you really have to think about how you're going to get things in. Don't design if you can't get something in. You have to think, can we crane this glass in? How difficult is it going to be? And before you actually draw it, make sure, and if necessary, ring up some glazing firms. Ring up a sort of glazing installation company, send them a few drawings, send them some photographs of the street and say, look at the pavement, look at the cars, look at the width of the street. Is it going to be possible to put glass in here, or should we design it a different way? Find those things out before you design it. And now I'm tempted to go to another project. But there's one more thing. Actually, what I should probably talk about, Will, shouldn't I, is the construction, what it's actually constructed of. So
yeah, that would be nice. And also there's this kind of interesting panels that we see in the building, concrete, which yeah.
Okay, so there was something about this house that I've explained. We've got a basement, and you've seen some rooms that are down in the basement. In order to dig a basement in anywhere, you dig a hole and you line it in concrete. Now, sometimes you pile it. Here, in fact, we did underpins, which means blocks of concrete. You dig out with a little mini digger, and you fill it with concrete, reinforced concrete, and you do them as sort of 1 meter wide lumps of rectangular lumps of concrete, and you build them down. I haven't got, I'm afraid, photographs I have somewhere, but I haven't got them to show you now. But you can imagine, if you dig a square hole in the ground and you line it with concrete. So you've got a concrete hole in the ground. So it makes logical sense to come up from the concrete, in concrete, and build your framework for your house in concrete. I also happen to like concrete. So I thought that's what we'll do. So you can see the concrete there. I didn't want any of the concrete near the street. It's a little bit alien, I suppose, in this Victorian stucco environment. So the whole thing is encased in glass, and it's very much within, but it's a structure inside the glass case that shrouds it. So when you can see it there, and the light at night is picking up the underside of the soffit. On top of that concrete there, we have rows of solar panels set down, and the glass comes up and goes over. So you can see the glass comes up, turns and goes over and rests on the concrete. And you can see here, the glass comes up, it goes over, which means you have a higher feeling front edge, more space inside. You've got quite a lot on top of that concrete soffit in terms of, you've got your thickness of concrete, which might be 200 mil, let's say. Then you've got insulation on top, which might be another 200 or even 250 mil. Then a waterproofing membrane. Then you also have got to have a curb, because you can't have water just sitting on that. So you've got to have at least 150 mil up. I wonder if we've got a section here. Yes, we've got a section. Let's see if I can enlarge that. This is only a stupid thing. Sorry about this. There we go. You can see here. Sorry, well here, that's a side section. I want a different section. That's the section we want. Okay, so you can see there's the man on the pavement, there's the wall, there's the little front patio, there's the glass wall with all its sliding doors that lets you into the main part of the house. Here's the glass that goes up there. This is not a construction detail, it actually goes a little higher, over, drops down, rests on the concrete. The concrete's been cast to go along and up. So from the street, you see a concrete face. This grey area is all insulation and waterproofing laid to falls, to a gutter that falls down at the back. And that's a little curb. And actually, we must have come up higher in our construction drawings, because we've got solar panels on there. Quite shallow, but you can't see them from the street. So we've managed that somehow. And then the other thing I'm going to show you quickly is so sometimes I'll just show you this. So concrete columns these columns go from the basement all the way up to the roof with an intermediate floor. There's the basement column. Basement floor, concrete floor, it's the concrete slab, we ground it. Actually, I lie, We had the concrete floor. We then laid insulation. Then we laid 75 mil of concrete screed with the underfloor heating and things underneath it. So we get all our services underneath. We mimicked what the concrete slab would look like if we'd left a bare concrete slab and around it. So I don't like to do any decoration. I like everything to be real. So even though we've got a sandwich here on the bottom, we made sure that the concrete that was going to be brought to be piped into this house, and it comes on a concrete, one of those revolving lorries with a great big hose, huge hose that goes into the house. They pour the concrete in, and then it self-levels. That concrete is exactly the same concrete that came to do the structure. So it's the same totally basic concrete. And as well as casting the concrete columns with a timber shuttering to give the timber board mark finish, we also did these little tables, which I thought articulates the structure, gives it some meaning. And I like to have useful things. I like to think about useful things while you're designing the basic structure and see if we can add some on. So you have this sort of story from the very beginning to the end. And this silver thing here, you'll have seen it upstairs as well, is like it's a recessed column box which has power, lighting circuit, light switches, dimmers, and this is lighting in here. There's one illuminated. So power, sockets, a little tiny thermostat, which is a little stainless steel thimble thermostat to tell the heating system how hot it is in the room. We have none of those ugly white plastic objects in this house. No visible smoke detectors, no visible thermostats, nothing. Everything's hidden in these boxes. And I just thought I should explain to you how they're designed, and I've found a drawing somewhere. Here we go. So to do the column boxes, this is one of 2 drawings that we produced to work out what each box has to have. And each box is drawn without its face plates, so what goes in behind it, and its face plates on top. So this one has a little door here, and what is behind it is it looks like a heat miser controller. It will either be controlling the cooling or the heating in the house, but we don't want to look at it. So it has a little steel door with a little hole that you can open. So for the people manufacturing these, this went to the electricians so they could check that everything fit in the boxes. So, and it also went to the metal workers who were going to make these boxes, because they had to know that they were going to make, a square hinge door, a square plate with, I don't know, can't remember what those are, another square plate with socket holders, and that's for every column. And these had to be designed before the structural engineer finished his structural design, because if we go back to this and even that one, you see this column here, it's 2 timber boards wide. In other words, this column has been the column being poured in situ into a we call it shuttering. It's like a mold, but it's basically some flat boards, a big wide one there, a little skinny one here, another wide one on the back, and another skinny one on the back there. And that's just like a box. And it's sort of clamped together. And when the concrete lorry comes, the concrete is poured in at the top. And then when it sets, those boards that were on there are taken out. And what's ever on the face of the board is what is marking the face of the concrete. So that's why this is called board marking, because the board was made up of lots of little skinny boards attached to a flat shuttering board, which then gives these lines. Now, if you want to have boards, all these timber boards facing your shuttering, you want them to be the cheapest boards possible. So I did research before the structural engineer finished to say, what are the cheapest boards you can buy anywhere? I discovered that fencing boards, very, very basic fencing boards, was 65p a metre or something. So, okay, that's the cheapest boards we could get. And I ordered some samples, and they arrived on my desk. and I left them on my desk over the weekend. And all the papers they had been sitting on had all curled, because what I didn't realise is they were so damp that all the dampness had come out and made all the papers on my desk all crinkly and damp. Actually, that's a really good thing, because when you're casting concrete, you want to cast against very damp shuttering, because otherwise, if you cast against dry wood, the wood sucks the water out of the concrete. And when it sucks the water out of the concrete, the face of the concrete is too dry too quickly, and it doesn't pick up the lovely marks of the timber or the grain. It becomes friable and it falls off. So actually, not only were they cheap, they were also perfect because they were so clean. So when I was working out the dimensions of these columns, I had to, and the fencing boards only come 65 mil wide or something like that. So I had to say to the engineer, look, we've only got twice 65, that's 130. You can only have 130, which is why this column is much wider here, because the whole structural force, most of the structural force of this column is next to the column box, is next to this panel, because that panel is deeper than one board. It's slightly into this one. It's probably 85 or something, because back boxes, and once you've got the structure, is a bit wider. So actually the engineer was saying, well, we can put a bit of reinforcement in here, but we need a bit more width to these because I want to get more reinforcement in to hold this up. So when these things were designed, these column boxes, they were designed very, very early on when we were designing the structure with the structural engineer, and that is a cross section for the structural engineer. There's these 2 boards wide. This is a really complicated one between the entrance hall and the living room, where we've got the lighting here on 2 sides. We've got to have a panel between them because this side is a fire lobby, that side's not. So this cement particle board obviously has the regulation half-hour or 1-hour fast stop, I can't remember, but it's skinny, it's only 16 mil, so we will have looked for the thinnest possible fast stop board to go in there, because if this was to catch fire, the fire must not get into there and vice versa. And this shows a socket back box, a junction box, on both sides. There we go. And this is the lighting, and the lighting is in there. I think that's probably, is that enough on Earl's Court, Will?
No, that's great. I just think there was someone just put their hand up to ask a question. So
Oh,
I just
ask me a question. I can't see you. Yes.
Are you there? The questioner? No? Maybe they've disappeared again. I'm sorry.
Ask a question. No?
There was another question about, it was about asking about costs of the project.
Oof. I think building costs came in at about 1 million. This house. Roughly, I think.
Okay.
Sounds a lot, but it's central London, incredibly expensive to build in central London. Do those pinging noises mean questions, Bill?
Yeah, that was a question. It's a question from Zadie. He's got a hand up.
Hi there. I was just wondering how you went about sort of raising money for a project like this, and obviously it's something that you developed yourself, and kind of how you decided to actually just jump into that.
I raised money through a bank, which is not so easy, actually. But I did actually borrow money from a bank. It's easier if you've got property to borrow against. But I did, so I was lucky. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on Earl's Court? Because I'm going to move to another project. So I'm going to move to this other one, which is this one. So this is a house that we're in the middle of building. Well, this is the site. In the middle there, it is in Northamptonshire. It is on 2 lakes. So the land that was bought by the client is this much land here. Paddocks, a horrible pine plantation, which we felled, and these 2 fish ponds, where previously what people would do is pay their few quid, arrive with their fishing rod and sit around here, catch fish, photograph themselves holding their giant fish, and then put the fish back in. That is a sport very popular in England. Apparently, I didn't know about it, but there we go. So my client bought this and wanted a house and a stable building. And these two lakes are fake lakes. They were dug by, it's an old brick quarry. They were dug in 25 years ago. So it had a spit of land between. And what we decided to do was to build a house on this piece of land in between the lakes, being, I thought, the most interesting position on the land. It's also quite high because the land falls away this way quite dramatically. So you have a view over this lake and to some hills over here. So that is the site. And I'm going to just take you back to, it's called House Between Two Lakes. This is it. So this is halfway through construction. And you can see that the roof is on, the balconies are on, and it's hanging over the lake. But I'm actually going to take you now back to some construction drawings. I'm going to close. This is the site. So we've done a little house on piles. Now these dotted lines are where the piles were installed. So if you're going to, this is all very unstable ground. It's all clay, and it had been dug out by the bloke who made the fishing lakes, and he'd actually at one point dug this out and then mounded the earth back. It's completely unstable. When you want to find out what your earth is like underneath where you're going to build a house, you have to do what's called geotechnical investigations. And what that means is people, there are specialist firms that come, and they come with a bore. It's like a corkscrew thing. It drills a core of earth. They go down quite low, and they probably went down to about 10 meters here, and the diameter is probably just like 15 centimeters or something, and they core down and find out what the earth is, and then they write you a report which you give to your structural engineer, which tells you what the earth is. The structural engineer looks at that and says, Sophie, the earth is far too unstable. You're going to have to pile if you're going to do a house on this little bit of land. And piles are either concrete or steel, basically tubes, and they tend to be about 30 centimeters in diameter, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, and they are sometimes drilled into the ground with a sort of great big drill thing, or sometimes they're thumped into the ground. And I'm trying to remember, I think we thumped them into the ground here. Can you remember, Tom, how the piles were installed?
They were more like vibrated into the
vibrated into the ground.
They're steel piles.
And they are steel piles, exactly. So they go down something like 14 meters, so as far as this, even perhaps further, probably right down there. Which means that this house is designed off these pairs of piles. So I'm going to get rid of that and see if we've got a piling. We might have, yeah, okay. So this is interesting because you can see at the bottom, you can just, can you see a pile? I think just there underneath the steel, you can probably see a pile head. That I don't think is one. It's in the wrong place. I think they're just, the first one's tucked under there. So what we did in terms of construction is, there's the land bridge between the two lakes, big lake, little lake. The piles go down at every, two there, two there, two there, you know, they're in pairs, a pair there, a pair there, a pair there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairs, I think, maybe 8, not sure. And then on top of those, we put a steel ring beam all the way around. So our purpose, our kind of method with this house was to think, what's the cheapest way to build a house on this site? We're going to have to pay for piling, which is probably 18 or 20,000 pounds to pile this house. But how can we then build up off those piles as solidly but as inexpensively as possible? And it seemed to us the simplest way was to do steels running around the edge, then pieces across to brace it, that can then stick out a bit further where we want balconies overhanging the lake. They stick out here further than here, where it's a little balcony. and then go up in columns on top of where the piles are. So you can imagine you've got a pile down in the earth, coming up to the ring beam, straight up from there in a steel vertical column, again in all the pile positions, and then another ring beam around the top. Now, you will see that that ring beam is bigger than it needs to be. It's taller than it needs to be. And the reason is that because we want to put a lot of glazing around this house, we thought, okay, this is also, we're trying to do this on a really tight budget. If we want to have a lot of glass, we must use the least expensive, standard, efficient glass we can buy. And we knew a type of glazing system that we wanted to use. I think, in fact, in the end, we used an English version of it. But anyway, we were looking at something called Velfac, which is Denmark, and then I think we used something called Ideal Combi. They may actually, the English installer, I can't remember. But basically, their tallest glass panes are 2.4 meters. And 2.4 meters is too low for a ceiling height, in my opinion. I like the ceilings in a long, thin house like this to be at least 2.8 meters, maybe 3 meters. So what we thought is, how can we get extra ceiling height without it looking like we bought cheap, short windows and had to build it up above? So the answer was, make the steel that holds the roof planks, that trims the top of the building deeper than it would normally be, because then it will look meant. So if we then fast forward here, you can see that steel doesn't need to be that high. And it's here, you can see it's a steel ring beam, but actually all it really needs is that. We've added this to give, because our finished floor to ceiling is going to be up to the underside of that. So this is a computer visualization of the finished space, and you've got your columns here and this ring beam that looks as if it's holding up concrete precast ceiling planks, but actually they're being held on something that sits on top of this. It gives us this extra height. So we've got glazing 2.4 meters plus, I think that looks like 400. So we're a 2.8 meter ceiling height, which is good enough. And I don't think, well, we're now got a lot of this installed, and it doesn't look like this is a mistake. It looks like it's meant to be only 2.4 meters high. So all the glazing for this house came in at something like £60,000, which is nothing for an enormous amount of glazing. I think that even included the glazing. It's triple glazed, and it included the glazing for the stable building as well. So that's dirt cheap, really. Sounds a lot of money, but it is cheap. So what else? Again, think about light, work out where the light's going to go, work out whether light is going to fall in or not, work out if you have to protect yourself from light, because actually bright sunlight is quite strong here. So we did this to take some of the light out of the room, and also I wanted this building, because it's in the middle of farmland and it's surrounded by, ordinary houses. Nobody round here has a fancy modern house, and what the client really did not want to feel like she's built herself fancy design house in the countryside, oh clever me. That was not what she wanted. It wants to disappear, be low key, and so we clad it in grey corrugated fiberboard, which is what all the barns are clad in this area. And it picks up lichen very nicely, it gets dirty very nicely, you can get moss growing on it. When it rains, it gets an even nicer colour because it goes all dark grey. And I thought that a flat roof house is not right, it just looks like a lump. I thought we've got to play with roof here, we've got to sort of think, all houses in Northamptonshire all have roofs. I mean, sloping roofs, that's the vernacular. So let's have a sloping roof, but let's be a bit clever about it. And this is what you can see here. So I thought, okay, it's not a roof. It's got many functions. It's going to cut some of the sunlight out of all this glass. It's going to allow you to come out of this glazing and stand under there chatting if it's pouring with rain, or having a cigarette or something without getting soaked. It's going to stop the rain beating against this glass, which, if you've got to have your windows cleaned all the time, is a pain. So it protects the glass a bit. But and it also goes up higher than the flat roof, which means there's a lot of stuff on the roof There are solar panels. There are some skylight exits for workmen to get on the roof to service solar panels and stuff. There's quite a lot being hidden up there. So if it rises up a little higher, it hides those. And it also floats. So actually, when you see the sky through those gaps, when you get close to the building, you realise it's not a roof at all. It's just a canopy. And is there another picture? Yeah, okay, here you can really see it. And because it's a canopy, we had to express the corners apart. So it really is a floating element. It's supported on these galvanized steel kind of angle arms that bolted to the roof and then come up and over. Picks up the sun beautifully when the sun is in the right position. And this thing is, I call this the canopy and this like the fringe. It's like when you have a fringe and it's too long and it's over your eyes because it hangs down below the top of the glass. So when you're inside, you see it there. So it takes away the kind of solidness of this top frame of the glass because it's outside and it picks up the light, the crinkly edge. So when you're looking at the glass, your eye is drawn to the crinkly edge here. You're not drawn to, you know, the ugly old glazing frame which is sitting there. It's not that bad actually, but it's nicer to see that. So you've got the canopy, you can just see the canopy arms there. Is someone asking a question? Because go ahead and ask. If that's what that beeping noise is.
Yeah, there was a question about cost again per square meter. Do you have? Would you have a?
I don't know. Sorry.
I don't know. You haven't finished it yet.
We haven't finished it yet. I think we're in about. There are 2 buildings on this site, and I think it's about $1 million again. So very good value considering that this is 220 square meters. This house, and the stable building is 160, I think. Something like that, could be a bit more. So here you can see it from the sky in a computer rendering from above the big lake. So this is a mistake, this thing. So you can see these are all the solar panels. This is a chimney. That is a passive vent thing which takes an accumulation. If it accumulates hot air in there in a boiling summer, if you were away with all the glass shut, it got very hot in there, which I personally don't think it is, but the services people think, I bet you we don't need it. But anyway, it automatically opens up and vents hot air out, which will, cold air comes in below and vents out there with an automatic system. I bet we don't need it. I'm going to, oh yeah, this is kind of interesting. This is the cross section through there. So that's the balcony overlooking the lake, the glass, what I call the fringe, which floats off. A bit bigger here, because some of this glazing obviously slides open, and the method that it slides, that's a glass pane. It moves out and then slides along behind the corrugated fiberboard behind. So the gap between the glass and the fiberboard is, for argument's sake, 20 centimeters, because the throw of those doors is, say, 15 centimeters and then slides behind. And this is the, sorry, I think that's the 15 centimeters. It slides behind that. That's 20, 25. That's the fringe. This is the canopy. That's the gap, which you can see through, whoops, what's going on here? You can see through daylight through there. Keep ticking. So that's that. Get rid of that. What else? What have we got? So we've got here. Seen that. You've seen that. Oh yeah. So you have to think. You know, this is the corrugated fiberboard, and if you're going to design something with corrugated fiberboard, you have to go down to every single tiny detail, of any material. You have to look at every detail. So you can't just say, I want to clad it like barns, and say to the contractor, clad it like you clad a barn, because he will come and he'll put something ugly. So you have to get onto the manufacturers of this, find out what all their different fixings are, choose the one you think is nicest, and then specify how it's going to be done. And you know, you're going to have to mark up your drawing that they're at certain spaces all in a straight line. Otherwise the guys will come and they'll put them all over the place. So you've got to think of everything in advance to make sure it's done properly. This is just a middle of construction photo of the glazing. This is the scaffolding, so the guys can get up and roof. That's a photo I must have taken quite recently, so it's sort of half built. Another one, a bit half built. We're going to excavate this land. I wanted the land, the water to come in under there, and when they were putting the piles in, they dumped some earth over here. So to get that out, if we do it, I'm waiting for a cost. We think the best way is, there's a guy who has a little barge boat, like a little sort of boat he uses on the canals for dredging the canals. We've got a Grand Union Canal not far from here, Western Union or something, I can't remember what it's called. He can actually probably bring his little boat, which has a little mini digger on it, because when they dredge the canals, they dig out the mud, dump it on the little boat and take it away. So we're going to find out what it would cost for him to come and dig that bit out, because I would like the water to pass under that balcony. I designed this balcony to have made big concrete beams which match the concrete floor inside, but they have gaps between them. You can just see there, and light will go up between those gaps. Actually, that's why we did them tapered. Where is it? Here. You see they're tapered because the idea is the water comes under there, catches the sunlight, sunlight sparkles, light comes up through these gaps. That's why they're wider there, to catch more light, to allow more sparkle. So I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm right, that at some times of the day, one side or the other, you'll get little sparkles coming up through there, reflected off the water. So I want to see if that works. I think it will. So that's that. That's that. That's why we want to dredge it. And this is in the autumn, so beautiful. And the willow trees go golden. That's it in the winter when it's sort of almost icy there, view from the house. So that's that one. Any other questions about construction for that Brick Hill one? No? I have some other things to show you on that one. Where are we? Here, I think. Oh yeah, what do I have here? I've got a few construction photographs I can show you. Anyone's got questions, just ask. So this is interesting actually. So that line there is a steel running between that column and the one on the opposite side. In between these steels, we have precast concrete banks. Now, precast concrete banks are the most basic sort of way of building a solid floor to brace between these. We want a solid base. Onto this goes insulation, various surfaces, and then, as in Earl's Court, another concrete screed. And on the roof, we are going to leave them exposed. We're not going to do anything with these. This is the finished thing. So we ran them, we worked out how they were going to lie. We ran them crossways because we want to see them in that. Obviously, we're going to see them, so we don't want to see beams across. We want to have them dropped on top, so they are dropped on top. So this will be the finished roof, ceiling of the rooms. On here will be a build-up, which will bring the floor level with the balcony planks. So that is the level of the floor inside. So you see it's quite a lot because there'll be quite a bit of insulation and stuff going on top there. This is quite recently, so these are the balcony planks. There'll be a little set of steps coming down off there. This is the corrugated fiberboard starting to get dirty, which is nice. This is the glazing in. This is the, the canopy. This is a detail, quite useful to see. So we've got the main cladding and an underlayer of cladding. This layer of cladding is in some places, not others. Always we have this datum, the bottom of the main cladding, always in the same line. I think it's very important when you're designing buildings to pick a sort of some horizon lines and stick to them. Don't, if in doubt, stick to your horizon line. So we did that in Earl's Court, at the top of the white wall that's on the pavement. That line is a horizon line in the house and it runs all the way around in the interior at the top of the white plastered walls above the kitchen. Everything is to that datum line. It brings a unity to everything. So what's this? Again, obviously, this line would carry all the way around the house. It would never change. So this is quite interesting up there. So we planted this on here. with little brackets. We have got this. This is a visqueen membrane. Tom, could you describe the reason for the visqueen membrane? Come look at this picture. Explain this one. This is Tom who did these details. So what's happening there?
It's to stop moisture coming into. Well, there's the outer layer is a breather membrane, which is to stop water from it's waterproof,
Yeah.
but it's breathable.
And I haven't got the section open, but what can you remember the build up behind that breather? We're going to leave this breather membrane. Basically, we've taken a photograph looking up. We're not going to cover it because actually you don't look up there. It's fine. It's just a black nothingness.
It's black and it's UV resistant, so that it can get sunlight on it without degrading. But under that is 50 mil of insulation, which goes over the top of an insulated, lightweight timber stud and plywood wall. So the frame is steel and concrete. The infill for the external walls is lightweight.
Are those questions?
Yes, yeah, we've got some questions here. Thank you. I was gonna. Well, shall I? Scott, they've typed them in. So Scott's asking, how is the client with the agricultural materials and detailing so far?
She chose it.
Okay, very good. and then how did
it, and then she loves it because it's low key. You know, because it's very inexpensive. Budget is really important on this one. And as you can see, you know, we've spent bits of money on things like these galvanized welded things. You know, you could do this cheaper. But where you can save money, you save, and then you save your bits of money you're going to spend on the things that make it special. So it's a beautiful material, this grey stuff. But it's completely dead and matte. You know, it's got no shine and sparkle. This house is in the mud. It's so wet there. There's so much water. You know, you need to feel that you're not trying to be clean, and you don't have to be clean with corrugated fiberboard. Dirt is fine. You know?
And there's a question about how difficult was it to obtain planning approval for this project?
This one was quite relatively easy. We have a very, very good planning consent for this one. We have hundreds of meters we've got very many hundreds of square meters more than the existing accommodation on site. So there was a small lodge of 100 and something square meters, and we ended up getting 500 and something square meters. When you're trying to get planning permission, you need to set up your team for planning consent like absolute clockwork. You need to know exactly what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, I really recommend using a planning consultant. If you've never done a planning application before in the UK, don't attempt it on your own. It will drive you crazy and take forever. And if you get off on the wrong foot and make a mistake, it's quite difficult to roll back and correct. So really what you want is a very competent planning consultant who's on board from day one, who helps you decide before you design. There's no point designing a building until you know what you can get planning consent for. So you sit down with your planning consultant. We will have sat down with him and thought, okay, we know we want to do it on the land bridge between. That's not, but not on the site of the existing building. So that's one thing. We know we want to get a lot more square meters than the existing building. So there was an existing building plus a cafeteria, plus a polytunnel, plus an old falling down shed, plus another falling down shed, you know, but they were dubious footprints, I would say. But what we did know, and the planning consultant knew was a really good card for us, was the fact that the previous owner had never applied for planning permission correctly. And what planning officers hate is when things aren't done correctly. So we could go and say, we are going to rectify all the breaches of planning that have been done in the past 20 years and get this on a, you know, correct and proper footing. So, you know, anyway, but you need a planning consultant. And it took us probably a year and a bit to get planning consent, but we only didn't get planning consent first time because of a BAT survey that we were missing that was impossible to do in the time constraints left because it has to be done within certain months. And because we had a very kind of daring client, and because me and the planning specialist could say, look, we've basically got it in writing from the planning officer that he doesn't object to any of these other things. So if he decided to turn down your planning consent on the BATs in 6 months' time when we can do it, you know, he can't really do that because he'll be going against what he's already said and he's put it in writing. So we said you can actually risk designing the whole building. So we risked designing the whole building, which meant she had to take the risk on all the professional fees, including ours. But what it meant is that the week we got planning permission, we were on site the week later. So we even went to tender, we did everything ready to start when the consent came through because it was kind of a formality. There is absolutely no way that you could do that unless you had an incredibly experienced planning consultant and who can say, well, look, of course there's always the risk that the world blows up, as it just has, you know, but given the rules and what they put in writing, it's not an unreasonable risk to take to go ahead and spend all those tens of thousands of pounds on professional fees to get the thing ready, and so she did. So that's my planning story on this one. Any other questions?
You're very shy out there, everyone. I don't know.
So this is, I know what I want to do. Why did I lay it out in a certain way? I don't know if you noticed the plan. Did I show you the plan? Maybe I didn't. I should show you the plan to explain why we've got curved walls in there. What's this? Oh yeah, oh actually I'm going to show you this first, which is the piling. This is the structural engineer's piling sort of axo, whatever you call it. So it's coming, there we go. So this is just basically showing the structural scheme. So these are the piles going down into the earth. This is the steel running around on top of the piles, around the edge, and then columns going up, and there are more. He hasn't drawn the steels on the top here. I don't know. This must be a part way through. I'm not sure. Yeah. So this is the kind of drawing you get early on. But I would strongly recommend working with your structural engineer. You know, when you're designing, because there's no point designing a house that then's difficult to. You know, it's good if the structure. I mean, we basically got the strategy for this. Once we knew we had to have piles, we worked out the strategy for how the structure was going to be built. And then we went to the structural engineer and said, we think if you put a steel ring beam around the edge with some steels coming across and then drop concrete planks on, we think that's the cheapest, most efficient way to do it. What do you think? And then they come back and they say things like, well, yeah, but you've got a cantilever here, quite a long cantilever. That means the pile is there. This is sticking out, floating above the ground. That's probably 2 meters or something. We want to tie these two steels together. So we have these little skinny poles in the corner, which there's one that shows there inside the house. This is concealed, and on the other end, one's concealed and one shows. So there'll be things they say you have to do, but it's better if you go with your structural scheme. Otherwise, if you know what you want, because it makes things cheaper, quicker, and you know they're not going to come up with anything on a basic building that, you know, they may not come up with anything that's going to improve on what you've got, what you think of anyway. And what is this? I know there was some. I want to show you a layout plan. That's not interesting. Ground floor GA. Here we go. So ignore all the colours in here, which are meaningless, really. This is the general arrangement plan of the ground floor. And when I was, and you can see there's the lake and the other lake, and this is the edge of the land, which then goes under that balcony like that. And this is the edge of the land, and we're going to excavate so it goes under there and pops up there. So it will look like a very long building on a bridge on two lakes. You know, you won't even really know that there's land underneath there. And because this house is so long and thin and is basically a rectangle, because in the end a rectangle is the cheapest thing to build, a square or a rectangle, and we didn't even put a second floor on it because we thought staircases are expensive. Let's just make it on one level, make it really easy to build. But it was really just looking like a rectangle sitting on the ground. It was a bit sort of basic. So how are we going to animate these spaces? And I did some early sketch, very, very early on, I did some sketches just trying to work out, you know, long, thin rectangles and how do you divide it? And I was drawing all these curves all the time and saying, you know, how do you cut up this space with curves? I don't want to draw, you know, boxy lines. If you're doing a house where you want to have a lot of bedrooms and bathrooms and stuff, and you don't want to live in a very, very fluid, open, I can hear you next door space, you're going to have walls. And most walls are cheapest built straight with metal studs and plasterboard on top. So you're going to have a lot of those in the end. So I just thought, well, let's clump them and let's have, where we can have fluid spaces, have them. So you come in here to in through a door and you immediately see a glass door there. So you come in here and you see glass, you see length of space. That's actually a little entrance hall. It's the country, it's nice to have two doors to keep this is a colder space. Then you come in here and the curves, you start seeing these curves. So you don't see any dividing walls really. And so that's what, did I have a photograph? Yes, you see, that's them when they started making that curving wall. The first coat goes on in a kind of, I think they call it a scratch coat. And then on top of that goes a finish coat. And I might have a picture here. The finish coat we've actually done by putting some dye in the render, which has brought the finish coat into a colour rather like this steel colour. By the way, we're going to leave these drips. We just leave all that there. You know, the house was being built, the rain was falling on, it was dripping through the cracks here, dripping down there, drip, 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 dripping down the steel. I like that. It shows the process of working. So that stays. Just going back to this plan, this goes around like that, and then you have a corridor and another one goes there, and in this that it's kind of like two arms holding bedrooms. So here you've got bedrooms and bathrooms all along there, all with views, lovely big full height glass windows looking out. They're kind of tucked in behind here, so I'm hoping that this reads more like screens. And then we've got a lot of joinery here too. It's like screens and cupboards rather than a lot of room dividers. And then you come along here and then you're into the master bedroom where you've got a glass to glass corner here. View, all of this is glass. View out of this willow tree, which is just starting to turn yellow. View out the corner of the big oak trees up there. Very private bit of sort of space here. And then way outside, so these are big, like old reclaimed York stone slabs on a ramp that leads you down to the garden, because the whole house, as you saw from the previous photos, hovers off the land by about, I don't know, 70 mil or something, maybe a bit more. And then, you know, into a master bathroom with, again, views there. So I think these, you know, this is interesting thing. You can't see it properly here because they put a lot of, this is a fireplace. With a concrete floating slab, ignore all these boxes, imagine they're not there. This is a concrete slab floating from here out there, which becomes somewhere you can sit. And this will be a log fire. It's got a steel canopy. It mustn't lose heat, so it's got a little valve, a little sort of thing there that you turn, which cuts it off or lets it open. This has now been installed. Pipe goes up through the hole in the ceiling, up and lets the smoke out. And when you're not lighting a fire, you shut the little thing off. When you are lighting a fire, you open that up and you open an air vent there, so you've got air to help the smoke up the chimney. And I wish I had a picture of it, because it's really an amazing thing, that, and you can't, it's covered in rubbish.
There's a picture of it in that folder.
Is there? We're going to find a picture. There is a picture, apparently, according to Tom. This is the colour of the red render that's on the curved wall. And this is literally sand and cement render with some red dye in it that you get from people that make red dye, that make coloured dyes for render. What It's not expensive to do because the plasterer just puts it on. The nice thing is that for a very low price, we've got really a rather nice finish. And it's through and through. It's not painted finish, it's the real material. So we don't actually have any decorative finishes really at all, I don't think, in this house. Everything's the real structure. That's a very recent picture. And have I got anything? I think that might be all I've got to show you, and it's 6 o'clock, so we might, I think probably can we do questions if you've got any? Because I think any questions at all, please ask.
Yes, absolutely. Please fire away. Please, it'd be nice to get some more student questions.
Yeah? Or Will, you can ask questions, and that might get people.
Well, I was going to, I mean, what's very nice is you've given us some great, technical advice, but you've given us some great design advice. This idea of like this sort of datum levels about when you decide to use a particular material, that actually just investigate ways of fixing it or how you put things together, and
generate ideas for the design. Let that generate design, because otherwise, if you go the other way round, it's never as satisfying as working with materials in the way that they're best worked with.
So I mean, when you're starting a project, do you often start with an idea about the material from the beginning? I mean, I can imagine you do.
Yes. What we do is we'll work in tandem. We'll start originally with, the first thing we'll do is think about placement of the building, and what the meaning of the building is. That's incredibly important. So what is the point of having a building here? What is the point of this house? What is the reasoning behind it? What is the image that the client wants? What's the sort of feeling of it? So I will go to clients and I'll say, what does this house feel like for you? I don't want to know what they want, because that gets too literal and they never know what they want. I want to know, when you wake up in the morning, when do you wake up in the morning? Do you like natural light? How is your day? How do you behave? And this
Okay, we've got a nice.
Go on, let's have an actual question.
There's another nice question. Michael's asking, which project did you enjoy more, Earls Court or this, and why? Is a follow-up question from
They're very good. The thing about Earls Court, it's on a very tight site, so it's very challenging. And there were a lot of complications to do with neighbours and permissions and that kind of thing. They're both nice. They're both. Earls Court was more money was spent per square metre for the finish. This one, the challenge has been getting a huge amount. I haven't even shown you the stable building. There's a whole second building on this site. I mean, the budget is approximately 2/3, 1/3, or a bit more than 2/3 for the house and 1/3 for the stable building. Has 4 loose boxes and a 1-bedroom flat. I mean, it's not, and a big machine shed. It's not small. And it's a building that matches this. It's also made of the corrugated fiberboard. It's very, very simple. We've used some recycled materials from another old project. So the excitement with this one is getting really a lot for, okay, it's a lot of money, £1 million, but it's not a lot of money for what we're doing.
Not for that many, not for the space. No, absolutely.
And for all the stuff.
Just the idea of using kind of agricultural materials as well, or things like the concrete beams that might not be this kind of glamorous first choice thing, but actually if you start to specify them and detail them, no, it's really fantastic. Great project.
Any other questions?
Well, I was just going to ask you've there is another question which is a little bit like the thing I was going to ask, but Zadie's asking, how have you gone about getting jobs since your work on the houses that you've built yourself? I mean, is it back to the first question when you're talking about being a female architect and the difficulties of being taken seriously? I mean, what have you got any more advice for our students? Because I mean, it's more than 50% of our students, I think it's 70-30, are women. So.
I think what. First of all, you need to work on actual building sites. You need to know how building sites work. I always say to people who are studying architecture, if you can when you're young and you can get taken on, take some really horrible jobs. You'll learn so much. So, for instance, I'm sure there are contractors out there who would, might need some drawing help. Try and get an internship or an apprenticeship or something with a contractor. Because if you're on a building site, try and be on a building site. If you're on a building site helping out, you'll learn so much. You'll learn about the human aspect of it. You'll learn how workmen actually work. You'll learn how bricklayers actually lay bricks and how a progress of a project works. Even if you just say, I'll be an assistant in the site office and shadow the contracts manager. Try and do it for 3 months. Don't do it for a week. You won't learn anything. Try and do it, for 3 or 6 months. Take some really boring jobs because you'll learn so much. And the same, try and work for a structural engineer or the problem I think with going to work for those huge practices where you're sat on a drawing package is you'll never get off the drawing packages. But one thing I would say, never ever take the job of, I'm going to go and work in the model shop because that's going to make me an architect. It isn't. It's going to teach you how to cut and stick. It won't teach you anything about how to build a building. You can spend years working for any, fancy architect, and you'll be as far away from being an architect as you are when you're in college. So, and the other thing I think is that it's not, I don't know what you say, Will, to your students, but it's architectural technicians who really understand how buildings are put together. I don't know what the training is. Do you teach architectural?
We do. There's actually a separate course at Westminster, so it's sort of separately taught. We certainly encourage. I totally agree with you about contractors, and actually a lot of our graduating students, third degree and also MArch, have gone to work for contractors, and they get an amazing amount of experience and responsibility. And also because you can, as an architect, as a designer, and you've got so much, your skills into drawing things and putting things together three-dimensionally, visualizing stuff, is incredibly useful and helpful.
Yeah, but it never goes further than the visualization. So my recommendation, particularly since, when I first started, construction was much simpler. Now, the building regulations, the compliance that you have to meet, and the high-tech nature of a lot of materials, I don't think architects can be architects unless they are also technicians. So I think it's work, and that's why I think the architectural education established is falling way behind, because I don't think students who just do an architecture degree can be architects, actually, in truth. And I think if some of you are third-year students and you're thinking of doing a part 2, I would seriously look into whether you actually go on to do the technology, the architectural technology thing, because you will have learnt quite a lot about design and ideas and all that kind of stuff. I question whether there's much value in doing another 2 years of design, actually.
Well, I think you might be right, but I'm not sure. I do think
a design course, but I would say to you students.
No. I think Westminster did quite a good job of at least encouraging students to go and experience sites and to go and.
How many years out of interest, because I'm really interested to know, how many years is the architectural technology course?
Oh, it's a degree, I think.
So 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, we've got a good question here from Zadie again, which is she says, I saw that you started your career working for Vogue, so not as an architect. Do you think this gives you a different perspective on architecture?
Yeah, what it gave me is when I started studying, it meant I understood how the real world worked. So I'd worked for like 9 years in fashion journalism, and then I wanted to leave that and become an architect. I understood how the world worked, and I also had made contacts, and it's also helped hugely getting projects for fashion brands, which I'm just starting another one now because I understand that world. So yeah, it's never a mistake to let's say some of you are thinking, I can't really afford to go back to Westminster next year. I want to do 2 or 3 years out. It is never a mistake. Practical experience, you can take out 2, 3 years out, 4 years, whatever. I'm not saying do a totally separate thing, but you're interested in architecture, continue, but you could easily do 2, 3 years of working for contractors, architects. If you can work for an architectural firm in the architectural technology department, learn how to. Nobody's going to ask you. You're not going to be able to design a building on your own in a small practice unless you know how things like waterproofing works, and you won't learn that properly yourself. You need to be taught, and it's complicated. So it's fine to take years out. It's more than fine to take years out. Yeah.
I agree, but I think Pete's got a question.
Hi, Pete.
No, I've got a statement. Can you hear it?
Oh.
I can hear it.
I'm sorry. I just want to. I don't think what Sophie thinks architectural technology is as taught is not what I think you think architectural technology is. Just to
What is it?
clear.
So I understand.
Paul McLean and I and Scott Batty have been teaching at Westminster for quite a number of years is probably what you think of as architectural technology. We do teach students how to build. We have been doing for a long time, and we have an obsession with materials, as you do. We come from that. We all come from the world of making and fabrication. So I think we understand that. I don't think all universities necessarily do. Sorry, in our defence, I'll back off now.
You're in the NA course, in your technical studies.
So I missed that, Sophie.
You mean that you teach architectural technology as part of this course?
Of course, absolutely. Well, yes, I suppose so. I mean, the book that we've published, which is just about to go into a 3rd edition, is called Introduction to Architectural Technologies, strangely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So I think basically we're saying that when you need to employ more people, Sophie, then you should employ University of Westminster students, graduates.
Okay. Not AA. Okay, fine. Good. Well, work for contractors, work for architects, but don't work in the model shop and the decorative thing and the computer renderings, because in the end, if you can do a computer rendering, you can do a computer rendering. That's fine, but try and work in the nitty-gritty if you want to build, particularly if you want to start your own practice and actually get some jobs building stuff. Yeah,
I think that's great advice. And so, well, look, thank you, Sophie. That was a really wonderful to see the work, but also very inspirational and informative for our students.
Good.
Sophie, yeah, that was terrific. Thank you. So Zadie has another question. She's wondering if you have any advice for women looking to start their own practices on how to get going.
If you're don't start your own practice until you've got a job to do, because don't start a practice and then be looking for work. Try and get a job lined up before you jump ship from the job you're doing beforehand. You're working for someone. Probably get a job. Well, I would say you need to work for an architectural. Sophie looks like a madame from Devil Wears Prada. What do I think? I think run a job in a practice. Be a project architect in an existing practice so you know how to run a job before you start your own practice. So maybe work for a small practice where you actually get to follow a project from beginning to end. I'm assuming that your design skills and your drawing skills are going to be pretty okay by the time you've done 5 years in Westminster. You need the boring office learning, how to run a project, how to do a contract, all those things. Do it in a practice where you get practical experience in a fairly small practice before you start your own practice. Otherwise, you'll be learning too much on the job on your own. Make too many mistakes. I think that's what I would say.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay. Well, very nice.
Okay. Well. sorry, I lost it. So thanks again. That was terrific.
Okay, good.
So I
Bye.
wish we could give you a round of applause, but thank you. We'll see. We'll see
Bye.
you soon. And perhaps we could invite you to some crits sometime.
Yeah. When we're allowed to be in the wherever
Exactly.
when we're allowed to go somewhere. Thank you for
Yes.
thank yous. Okay. Bye. I've got to run now.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay.